Sarah Martinez had always believed that her military training was behind her. After 8 years as a Navy SEAL, she had traded her combat boots for running shoes, her tactical gear for a nurse's uniform. The transition from the special operations community to civilian life as an emergency room nurse in downtown Phoenix had been challenging, but she thought she had found peace in her new calling of saving lives, rather than taking them. The afternoon sun blazed through the windows of Phoenix General Hospital as Sarah finished her 12-hour shift. Her body ached from constantly being on her feet, treating everything from heart attacks to car accident victims. She had chosen nursing because it felt like the opposite of her military life. Here, she was healing people, giving them hope, bringing them back from the edge of death. As she walked through the hospital parking garage toward her old Honda Civic, Sarah's mind wandered to her weekend plans. Her sister Emma was coming to visit with her 2 young children, and Sarah was looking forward to being Aunt Sarah again, playing with her nephew and niece, maybe taking them to the zoo. It would be a normal, peaceful weekend. Exactly what she had been craving since leaving the Navy 2 years ago. The parking garage was dimly lit, with several overhead lights flickering or completely burned out. Sarah had complained to hospital administration about the poor lighting before, but budget cuts meant that even basic maintenance was often delayed. She quickened her pace slightly, her keys already in her hand, as she approached her car on the 3rd level. That's when she heard the footsteps behind her. Years of military training had sharpened Sarah's senses beyond those of ordinary civilians. She could detect threats that others would miss entirely. The footsteps were trying to match her pace, staying about 20 feet behind her. When she sped up slightly, they sped up. When she slowed down to test her suspicion, they slowed down too. Sarah's heart rate increased, but not from fear, from the familiar rush of tactical awareness that had kept her alive in Afghanistan and Iraq. Her mind immediately began cataloging potential weapons in her environment, escape routes, and defensive positions. The concrete pillars of the parking garage could provide cover. Her car keys, held properly, could become a striking weapon. Her medical scissors were still clipped to her scrubs. She decided to test her follower. Instead of going directly to her car, she took a detour toward the stairwell, as if she had forgotten something and needed to go back into the hospital. The footsteps continued following her, confirming her suspicions. This was not a coincidence. Sarah ducked behind a large SUV and waited. Within 30 seconds, 2 men appeared, looking around confused. They were both in their 20s, wearing dark hoodies and jeans. One was tall and thin, the other shorter but more muscular. They clearly hadn't expected to lose sight of her so quickly. "Where'd she go?" whispered the taller one. "She was just here." "Check behind those cars," replied his companion. Sarah studied them from her hiding position. Neither appeared to be trained professionals. Their body language was nervous, amateurish. They kept looking around frantically instead of methodically searching. These were opportunistic criminals, not skilled operatives. That was both good and bad news. Good because they would be easier to handle if things escalated. Bad because unpredictable amateurs could be more dangerous than professionals in some ways. She considered her options. She could try to sneak back to the stairwell and get help from hospital security. She could confront them directly and hope they would back down. Or she could try to get to her car and drive away quickly. Given their behavior, she suspected they were planning some kind of robbery or assault. Sarah chose a 4th option. She would let them find her, but on her terms. She deliberately made a small noise, kicking a loose piece of concrete. The 2 men immediately headed in her direction. Sarah positioned herself near the rear of the SUV, where she would have room to maneuver but also cover from other potential threats. "Hey there, miss," called out the shorter man as they approached. "We're lost. Can you help us find the exit?" His tone was friendly, but Sarah noticed that both men had their hands in their hoodies' front pockets. She also observed that the taller man was moving to her right, trying to flank her position. These were definitely not lost visitors asking for directions. "The exit is back the way you came," Sarah replied calmly, keeping both men in her line of sight. "Just follow the green signs." "Actually," said the shorter man, pulling his hand from his pocket to reveal a switchblade knife, "we think you're going to help us with something else. See, we've been watching you. Every day, same routine. You park here. You walk through here alone. We figure a nurse probably carries some cash. Maybe some of those prescription drugs we hear about. The taller man had pulled out what appeared to be a small pistol. Sarah recognized it as probably a .25 caliber. Not a powerful weapon, but certainly deadly at close range. Both men had now revealed their intentions. This was definitely a planned robbery, and they had been surveilling her for some time. "Look," Sarah said, raising her hands slowly. "I don't want any trouble. I'll give you whatever cash I have. My wallet is in my purse." "Wallet is in my purse. That's real smart," said the shorter man with the knife. "See? We heard nurses sometimes carry those little bottles of pain medication home with them. The good stuff. That's worth a lot more than whatever cash you got." Sarah realized they weren't just planning to rob her of money. They wanted her to help them steal controlled substances from the hospital. Or they believed she was already carrying drugs. This was more serious than a simple mugging. These men were probably dealing drugs, and thought healthcare workers were easy targets for their supply. "I don't carry medications," Sarah explained truthfully. "Everything is locked up in the hospital pharmacy. Individual nurses don't have access to take drugs home." "Don't lie to us," snarled the taller man, waving his gun more aggressively. "We know how this works. You people take that stuff all the time. Where is it?" Sarah could see that reasoning with them was not going to work. They had convinced themselves that she was hiding something valuable. And desperate drug dealers were not known for their logical thinking. She needed to change the dynamic of this situation quickly. Okay, she said, lowering her hands slowly. "I do have something. But it's in my car. In a special locked box under the seat. Hospital policy, you know. We have to keep it secure." This was completely false. But Sarah needed to move this confrontation away from the confined space between parked cars. Near her vehicle, she would have more options, and potentially more witnesses, if anyone else came into the parking garage. The two men looked at each other, and she could see greed overcoming their caution. The shorter man nodded toward her car. "All right. Let's go. But try anything stupid and you'll regret it real quick." As they walked toward her Honda Civic, Sarah's mind was working furiously. She needed to create an opportunity where she could neutralize at least one of the threats quickly. With her military training, she was confident she could handle both men if she could separate them or eliminate the firearm from the equation. The knife was actually less concerning to her than the gun, even though it looked more threatening. Sarah had been trained in knife defense, and she knew that most amateur knife fighters held their weapons incorrectly and telegraphed their attacks. The gun was more problematic, because even a poor marksman could get lucky at close range. When they reached her car, Sarah fumbled with her keys deliberately, buying herself time to observe their positioning. The taller man with the gun was standing directly behind her, probably 3 feet away. The shorter man with the knife had moved to her left side, about 5 feet away, where he could see both Sarah and anyone approaching from the stairwell direction. "Hurry up," demanded the gunman. "We don't have all day." "The lock sticks sometimes," Sarah explained, pretending to struggle with her car door. In reality, she was calculating distances and angles. If she could get the gunman closer, she might be able to grab his weapon hand and control it before he could fire. "Here, let me see that," said the knife-wielding man, stepping closer to look at what she was doing. This was the opportunity Sarah had been waiting for. With both men focused on her hands and the car door, she had a split-second window to act. Her years of close-quarters combat training took over instantly. Sarah spun around rapidly, her left hand shooting up to grab the gunman's wrist while her right elbow drove hard into his solar plexus. The motion was so fast and unexpected that he didn't have time to pull the trigger before she controlled his weapon hand. The gun discharged harmlessly into the concrete ceiling as Sarah twisted his wrist, forcing him to drop the pistol. The knife-wielding man reacted more quickly than she had expected, lunging toward her with the blade extended. But Sarah had fought trained insurgents with much better weapons and skills. She released the gunman's wrist and caught the knife fighter's attacking arm, redirecting his momentum so that he crashed into the side of her car. The gunman, still gasping from the elbow strike to his chest, tried to tackle Sarah from behind. She ducked low and swept his legs, sending him tumbling to the ground hard. The sound of his impact echoed through the parking garage. Both attackers were down, but not unconscious. The knife was on the ground near Sarah's feet, and the gun had skittered away under a nearby car. For a moment, everyone was breathing heavily and assessing the new situation. "What the hell?" gasped the shorter man, holding his ribs where he had hit the car. "She's just a nurse." The taller man was struggling to get back to his feet, his face showing a mixture of pain and complete confusion. "Nobody said she knew how to fight." Sarah stood calmly, her hands at her sides but ready to react to any further aggressive moves. Her voice was steady and controlled when she spoke. "You made a mistake," she said simply. "You assumed that because I'm a nurse, I'm helpless. You didn't bother to learn anything else about me before you decided to threaten my life." The shorter man was looking around for his knife, but Sarah kicked it further away. "Who are you?" he demanded. Sarah reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wallet that she flipped open. Inside was her military identification card, which she kept for veterans' benefits and emergencies. Even in the dim parking garage lighting, both men could see the official seal and her photograph in uniform. "Petty Officer First Class Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs," she said quietly. 8 years of active duty. 3 combat deployments. I've been trained to neutralize threats much more dangerous than 2 amateur drug dealers in a hospital parking garage. The color drained from both men's faces as the reality of their situation became clear. They had attempted to rob someone who had survived firefights with trained enemy combatants, someone who had been taught to kill efficiently and without hesitation when necessary. "We didn't know," stammered the gunman, still holding his chest where Sarah had struck him. "We thought you were just a regular person." "I am a regular person," Sarah replied. "I'm a nurse who takes care of sick and injured people. I chose this job because I wanted to help others and live a peaceful life, but that doesn't mean I forgot how to defend myself when someone threatens me with deadly weapons." The shorter man was clearly considering whether to try to run. Sarah could see it in his body language, the way he kept glancing toward the stairwell, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Don't even think about it," she warned. "I can catch you before you make it 10 steps, and I'm much faster than I look." This was not an idle threat. Navy SEALs were required to maintain exceptional physical fitness, and even though Sarah had been out of active duty for 2 years, she had kept up her running and strength training. Part of her transition therapy had involved maintaining the physical discipline that had been such a central part of her identity. "What are you going to do with us?" asked the taller man. Sarah considered this question carefully. As a civilian, she had options that she wouldn't have had as a military operator. She could call the police and have them arrested for attempted armed robbery. She could let them go with a warning, though that seemed unwise given that they had been surveilling her and would likely try again with another target. Or she could try a different approach. "That depends on you," she said finally. "You're going to answer some questions for me first." Both men nodded quickly, clearly preferring conversation to physical confrontation with someone who had just demonstrated superior fighting skills. "How long have you been watching me?" Sarah asked. "About a week," admitted the shorter man. "We heard that hospital workers sometimes have access to prescription drugs. We thought it would be an easy score." "Who told you that?" The 2 men looked at each other nervously. "Just some guy we know," said the gunman vaguely. Sarah stepped closer to him, and he flinched involuntarily. "I need better information than that. If someone is spreading rumors about hospital staff being easy targets, other people are going to get hurt. Healthcare workers save lives. They don't deserve to be terrorized by people like you." "His name is Marcus," the shorter man said quickly, shooting an angry look at his partner. "Marcus Rivera. He deals to some of the homeless camps downtown. He said nurses and doctors always have the good painkillers, and they're too scared to fight back." This information troubled Sarah deeply. If word was spreading that healthcare workers were vulnerable targets for drug theft, it put all of her colleagues at risk. Many of her fellow nurses were young women who worked late shifts and walked through parking garages just like this one. They didn't have military training to protect themselves. "Where does this Marcus operate from?" she asked. "Look, lady, we can't tell you that," said the taller man, finally showing some backbone. "You don't understand the kind of people we're dealing with. Marcus isn't just some street dealer. He's connected to serious organizations. Sarah studied his face and saw genuine fear there. These two were small-time criminals who had gotten involved with something bigger than they could handle. That made the situation more complicated, but also more urgent. What kind of serious organizations? She pressed. Before either man could answer, the sound of car doors slamming echoed through the parking garage. Someone else had arrived, and from the sound of multiple vehicles, it wasn't just one person. Sarah felt her tactical awareness spike again as she realized this situation was about to become much more complicated. The sound of multiple car doors slamming reverberated through the concrete structure like warning shots. Sarah's military instincts immediately kicked into high gear as she processed the new threat. The two would-be robbers looked terrified, which told her everything she needed to know about who had just arrived. "Is that your backup?" Sarah asked quietly, keeping her voice calm despite the spike in her adrenaline. "We don't have backup," whispered the shorter man, his eyes darting toward the source of the sounds. "Oh no, oh no, oh no, this is bad, this is really bad." The taller man was frantically looking around for his dropped gun. "Marcus must have followed us. He said he might check up on our first job." Sarah quickly kicked the pistol further under the car where none of them could easily reach it. If this Marcus was arriving with multiple associates, the last thing she needed was more weapons in play. She needed to assess the new threat and determine whether these were more amateur criminals or actual professionals. Heavy footsteps echoed through the parking garage, accompanied by low voices speaking in what sounded like Spanish. Sarah counted at least 3 distinct sets of footsteps, possibly 4. They were moving methodically through the garage levels, checking each area systematically. These weren't panicked amateurs rushing to a scene. This was a coordinated search pattern. "How many people does Marcus usually travel with?" Sarah asked the two men, who were both looking increasingly desperate. 3 or 4 guys, stammered the gunman. "Look, lady, you need to let us go. If Marcus finds us here like this, with you having beaten us up, he's going to think we were trying to cut him out of the deal." "What deal?" Sarah demanded. "The hospital thing," said the shorter man frantically. "Marcus has this whole plan to use hospital workers to get access to medical supplies, drugs, even patient information. We were supposed to be recruiting you, not robbing you." This revelation made Sarah's blood run cold. This wasn't just about 2 desperate addicts looking for a quick score. This was an organized operation targeting healthcare facilities and workers. The implications were staggering. Patients could be put at risk, medical supplies could be diverted from people who needed them, and her colleagues could be forced into criminal activity through threats and intimidation. "Recruiting me for what, exactly?" she asked, though she was also listening carefully to the approaching footsteps. They were getting closer, maybe 1 level below them now. "To steal drugs from inside the hospital," the taller man explained quickly. Marcus figured out that if he could get hospital workers on his payroll, he wouldn't need to risk breaking into pharmacies or hijacking delivery trucks. Much safer to have someone on the inside just walking out with the stuff. "And if we refuse to cooperate?" Both men looked at her with expressions that answered her question without words. Marcus and his organization clearly used intimidation, threats against family members, and violence to ensure compliance. Sarah thought about her colleagues, young nurses just starting their careers, older nurses supporting families, people who had dedicated their lives to healing others. The idea of these criminals targeting them filled her with a cold fury that she hadn't felt since her military days. The footsteps were now on their level, maybe 50 yards away. Sarah could hear voices more clearly now, and they were definitely speaking Spanish. She caught fragments of conversation that suggested they were looking for los dos idiotas, the 2 idiots. Apparently, Marcus was not impressed with his subordinate's performance. "Here's what we're going to do," Sarah said quietly but firmly. "You 2 are going to hide behind that pillar over there and stay completely silent. I'm going to handle Marcus and his friends." "Are you crazy?" hissed the shorter man. "There are at least 4 of them, and they're armed. Real weapons, not some little Saturday night special like Tommy had." "I've faced worse odds," Sarah replied calmly, "but I need to know exactly what I'm dealing with. How dangerous is Marcus? Is he just a drug dealer or something more serious?" The 2 men exchanged worried glances. Finally, the taller one spoke up. "Marcus used to work for one of the cartels down south. got kicked out for being too violent, if you can believe that. Now he runs his own operation, trying to prove he's still relevant. The word is he's killed at least 6 people in the past 2 years. This information changed everything. Sarah wasn't dealing with local street criminals anymore. This was a trained killer with cartel experience and nothing to lose. The military part of her mind began automatically assessing the tactical situation. She was in a confined space with limited cover, facing multiple armed opponents with superior numbers. Her advantages were surprise, training, and the fact that they didn't know what they were walking into. "Get behind that pillar now," she ordered the 2 men. "If this goes badly, you run for the stairwell and call 911. Tell them there's an active shooter situation at Phoenix General Hospital parking garage, level 3. Both men scrambled toward the concrete pillar Sarah had indicated. They seemed genuinely grateful that she was willing to stand between them and Marcus. Despite the fact that they had just tried to rob her at gunpoint, Sarah quickly surveyed her environment one more time. The concrete pillars provided decent cover but limited mobility. Her car could serve as concealment but wouldn't stop bullets. The stairwell was about 40 yards away. Too far to reach if shooting started. Her best option was to try to control the situation before it escalated to violence. She pulled out her cell phone and quickly typed a text message to her sister Emma. "Emergency. If you don't hear from me in 1 hour, call Phoenix PD and tell them Sarah Martinez is in trouble at Phoenix General Hospital parking garage. Tell them I'm former Navy SEAL and there may be cartel involvement." She hit send, just as the voices became much clearer. "¿Dónde están esos idiotas?" The voice was deep, authoritative, and clearly irritated. "No sé, jefe. Their car is here but I don't see them anywhere." Sarah could now see shadows moving between the parked cars. 4 men, all dressed in dark clothing, moving in a loose formation that suggested at least basic tactical training. One of them was significantly larger than the others, probably Marcus himself. They all appeared to be carrying weapons, though she couldn't see exactly what types from her position. She made a decision that would have seemed insane to most civilians but made perfect sense to someone with her background. Instead of hiding and hoping they would leave, she stepped out into the open where they could see her clearly. "Are you Marcus?" she called out, in a strong, clear voice that echoed through the parking garage. The 4 men immediately stopped moving and turned toward her. Sarah could see them clearly now. Marcus was indeed the largest, probably 6'4" and heavily built, with numerous tattoos covering his arms and neck. He was holding what appeared to be a .45 caliber pistol. The other 3 men were smaller but looked equally dangerous. 2 of them carried similar handguns, while the third had what looked like a sawed-off shotgun. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus called back, raising his weapon but not yet pointing it directly at her. "I'm the nurse your 2 employees were supposed to recruit," Sarah replied, staying perfectly calm. "We need to talk." Marcus gestured to his men, and they began spreading out to surround her position. This was exactly what Sarah had expected, a classic encirclement tactic designed to eliminate any escape routes. However, they were making the mistake of assuming she was a terrified civilian who would be paralyzed by fear. "Where are Tommy and Rico?" Marcus demanded, moving closer but keeping his gun ready. "They're safe," Sarah answered truthfully. "They explained your operation to me. The plan to use hospital workers to steal medical supplies and drugs. It's actually quite clever." Marcus looked surprised by her response. He had clearly expected to find either a cowering victim or evidence that his men had been arrested or injured. Sarah's calm demeanor and apparent knowledge of his plans had caught him off guard. "Is that so?" he said, lowering his weapon slightly. "And what do you think about this plan?" "Nurse, I think it has some serious flaws," Sarah replied, taking a small step forward. This movement put her closer to Marcus, but also positioned her near a concrete pillar that could provide cover if needed. "Flaws?" Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "Lady, I've been running successful operations for 15 years. I don't think some hospital worker is going to teach me about flaws. The flaw is that you're targeting the wrong people," Sarah explained, taking another small step. She was now within 20 feet of Marcus, close enough to see the details of his tattoos and the cold calculation in his eyes. "How do you figure that?" "Hospital workers are trained to notice things," Sarah said. "We're taught to observe patients carefully, to spot symptoms and changes that might indicate problems. We're also trained to work under pressure and make quick decisions in emergency situations." "Do you really think people with that kind of training are going to be easy to intimidate and control?" Marcus considered this for a moment, his head tilted slightly as he studied Sarah more carefully. "You know what? You might be right. Maybe I need to find a different approach with hospital workers. Maybe I need to be more persuasive." He raised his gun again, this time pointing it directly at Sarah's head. "How about this? You help me out, or I start shooting people in your emergency room until someone does." Think that might be persuasive enough? The threat against her colleagues and patients triggered something deep in Sarah's psyche. Throughout her military career, her primary mission had been to protect innocent people from exactly this kind of threat. The idea that this man would target sick and injured civilians to get what he wanted crossed every moral line she had ever drawn. "That would be a mistake," she said quietly. "Really?" "And why is that?" "Because then this stops being about business and becomes personal for me." Marcus laughed again, and this time his men joined in. "Personal? Lady, you're one nurse with no weapon, facing 4 armed men. How personal could you possibly make this?" Sarah's response was barely above a whisper, but in the concrete structure of the parking garage, every word carried clearly to all 4 men. 8 years, United States Navy SEALs, 3 combat deployments, 17 confirmed kills in direct action operations. I've taken down terrorist cells, drug labs, and weapons smugglers. I chose to become a nurse because I wanted to save lives instead of taking them. But if you threaten innocent people under my protection, I can very quickly remember how to do my old job." The parking garage became completely silent, except for the distant hum of traffic from the street level. Marcus and his 3 companions were staring at Sarah, with expressions ranging from disbelief to growing concern. In the span of 30 seconds, their perception of the situation had completely changed. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but Sarah could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "2 of your men are hiding behind that pillar over there," Sarah said, pointing without taking her eyes off Marcus. "Tommy and Rico. Ask them whether I'm bluffing." Marcus gestured with his head, and one of his men moved toward the pillar where Tommy and Rico were concealed. Within seconds, both of them emerged with their hands raised, looking thoroughly defeated. "Boss," Tommy called out nervously. "She's telling the truth. She took us down like we were children. Disarmed me before I could even think about pulling the trigger." Marcus's expression darkened as he processed this information. Sarah could see him calculating odds and considering options. He was clearly experienced enough to recognize that the situation had become much more complicated than he had anticipated. "So, what do you want?" he asked finally. "I want you to leave my colleagues alone," Sarah replied. "Find a different way to run your business that doesn't involve targeting healthcare workers. And I want you to spread the word that Phoenix General Hospital is off limits to your organization." "And if I refuse?" Sarah's smile was cold and completely without warmth. "Then you're going to discover why threatening a Navy SEAL is the last mistake you'll ever make." The tension in the parking garage was thick enough to cut with a knife. 4 armed criminals faced off against 1 unarmed woman. But somehow the balance of power had shifted completely. Marcus and his men were beginning to understand that they had walked into a situation far beyond their experience or preparation. What happened next would determine whether this ended with words or with violence. And Sarah was prepared for either outcome. The standoff stretched for what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds. Marcus was clearly weighing his options, trying to decide whether Sarah was genuinely as dangerous as she claimed, or if this was an elaborate bluff. His 3 associates were looking to him for guidance, their weapons still drawn but their confidence visibly shaken. Sarah used this moment of uncertainty to her advantage. She slowly reached into her pocket and pulled out her cell phone, holding it where everyone could see it clearly. "I've already sent a message to my emergency contacts," she said calmly. "If I don't check in within the next 45 minutes, they're calling Phoenix Police Department with a full description of this situation, including your names and your connection to cartel operations. The clock is ticking, Marcus. This was a calculated psychological move. Sarah was applying pressure, while giving Marcus a way to save face by walking away. In her experience, most criminals, even dangerous ones, preferred to avoid unnecessary confrontations with law enforcement, especially when they had ongoing operations to protect. Marcus's face tightened with anger, but Sarah could also see him processing the implications. A shootout in a hospital parking garage would bring massive police attention, which would be bad for his business regardless of the outcome. You think you're pretty smart, he snarled. But you don't know who you're dealing with. I've got operations all over this city. You can't protect every nurse, every doctor, every hospital worker in Phoenix. You're right, Sarah acknowledged. But I don't have to protect everyone. I just have to make targeting healthcare workers so expensive and dangerous for you that it's not worth the profit. She took a step closer to Marcus, now within 15 feet of him. At this distance, she could move fast enough to reach him before he could reliably get off a shot, especially if she caught him off guard. Her proximity was making his men nervous. She could see them shifting their positions, trying to get better angles. Here's what I'm offering you, Sarah continued. Walk away now, find a different business model, and we never see each other again. Or stay here and find out what happens when you threaten someone who has spent years learning how to kill people much more dangerous than you. And what if I choose option 3? Marcus asked with a cold smile. What if I just kill you right here and now, and then go back to my original plan? Sarah's response was delivered in the same calm, measured tone she had been using throughout the confrontation. Then you'll discover that killing a Navy SEAL is much harder than you think, and that even if you succeed, you've just made yourself the target of every special operations veteran in Arizona. We take care of our own, Marcus. Always. This wasn't entirely true. Sarah didn't have a network of SEAL veterans ready to avenge her death, but Marcus didn't know that. And the reputation of military brotherhood was legendary enough that he would likely believe it. Marcus was clearly struggling with the decision. Sarah could see the internal battle playing out on his face. His pride and reputation demanded that he not back down from a lone woman, regardless of her background. But his survival instincts were warning him that this situation had become far too unpredictable and dangerous. The deciding factor came from an unexpected source. The man with the sawed-off shotgun, who had been silently watching the exchange, suddenly spoke up. Boss, we should go. This whole thing has gone sideways. We came here for a simple recruitment job, and now we're facing off with some kind of commando in a place where cops could show up any minute. Marcus shot him an angry look, clearly furious at having his authority questioned in front of the others. But Sarah could see that the man had voiced what they were all thinking. This had escalated far beyond what anyone had planned or wanted. Besides, the man continued, even if we take her down, there's no way to make it look like an accident. Hospital parking garage, multiple shooters, trained victim who fought back, that's going to bring federal attention. ATF, maybe even military investigators, if she's really who she says she is. Sarah felt a moment of respect for this criminal's tactical thinking. He was absolutely right. A violence against a former special operations soldier would trigger investigations that Marcus's organization couldn't afford. Marcus holstered his weapon abruptly, his jaw tight with suppressed rage. You win this round, nurse. But this isn't over. I've got a long memory, and I don't forget people who cost me money and respect. Neither do I, Sarah replied evenly. And I remember people who threaten my colleagues and patients. If I hear about anyone targeting healthcare workers in this city, I'm going to assume it's you. And then we'll have a very different kind of conversation. Marcus gestured to his men, who began backing away toward the stairwell. But as they moved, Sarah noticed that Tommy and Rico, the original 2 attackers, weren't following them. They remained near the pillar where they had been hiding, looking uncertain and frightened. You 2 aren't coming with us, Marcus called to them without turning around. You screwed this up from the beginning. Find your own way home. Sarah watched as Marcus and his 3 associates disappeared down the stairwell, their footsteps echoing until the sound of car doors and engines starting confirmed their departure. She remained alert and ready until the sounds faded completely, knowing that criminals sometimes doubled back for surprise attacks. Only then did she turn her attention to Tommy and Rico, who were still standing near the concrete pillar, looking lost and defeated. Both men appeared to be in their early 20s, and now that the immediate danger had passed, Sarah could see that they looked more like scared kids than hardened criminals. "So, what's your story?" she asked them. "How did you end up working for someone like Marcus?" Tommy, the taller one who had carried the gun, spoke first. "It wasn't supposed to be like this. We just needed money. Rico's got a sick mom who needs medication that insurance won't cover, and I got laid off from construction work 6 months ago. Marcus said it would be easy money," Rico added. "Just talk to some hospital workers. Maybe get them to help out with small stuff." He never said anything about guns or threatening people. Sarah studied both young men carefully. Her experience in combat zones had taught her how to read people, how to distinguish between hardened criminals and desperate individuals who had made poor choices. These two fell clearly into the latter category. "How long have you been working for Marcus?" she asked. "This was supposed to be our first job," Tommy admitted. He said, "If we did well, we could make $500 each for a few hours' work. And what were you supposed to do if I refused to cooperate?" Both men looked uncomfortable. "He said to scare you a little. Maybe threaten to hurt your family or something, but not to actually hurt anybody, unless we had to." Sarah shook her head in disgust. Marcus had sent these amateurs into a situation they were completely unprepared for. With weapons they barely knew how to use, and with no real understanding of what they were being asked to do. They could have easily ended up dead or in prison for life because of his manipulation. "What are you going to do now?" she asked them. Tommy and Rico looked at each other uncertainly. "I don't know," Rico said. "Marcus probably won't want anything to do with us after tonight, but we still need money for my mom's medication." Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. "What kind of medication does your mother need?" "It's for diabetes. Insulin. The good stuff is really expensive, and Medicare only covers part of it." "And you?" she asked Tommy. "What kind of construction work did you do?" "Electrical mostly. I was apprenticing to be an electrician before the company went under." Sarah pulled out her cell phone and scrolled through her contacts. "I know someone at the hospital who handles patient assistance programs for medication costs. And my brother-in-law runs an electrical contracting business. He's always looking for reliable workers." Both young men stared at her in amazement. "You would help us? After what we tried to do to you?" "I'm a nurse," Sarah explained. "It's my job to help people who are in trouble, even if they've made mistakes. But this comes with conditions." She held up her hand before either could respond. "First, you stay completely away from Marcus and anyone connected to his organization. Second, you report to me once a week for the next 3 months to let me know how you're doing. Third, if you ever hear about anyone targeting healthcare workers, you call me immediately." Tommy nodded eagerly. "We can do that. Absolutely. And fourth," Sarah continued, "you tell everyone you know what really happened here tonight. You spread the word that hospital workers are not easy targets, and that there are people watching out for us who are much more dangerous than we look." Rico looked confused. "What do you mean?" Sarah smiled for the first time since this whole encounter began, but it wasn't a warm expression. "I mean, you tell them that threatening a nurse might mean you're actually threatening a former special operations soldier, or a combat veteran, or a former police officer. Healthcare attracts a lot of people with interesting backgrounds, and criminals would be wise to remember that." As she spoke, Sarah was already planning her next steps. She needed to contact her old military network to see if anyone had information about Marcus and his operations. She wanted to reach out to hospital security directors across the city to warn them about the threat. And she needed to have a conversation with Phoenix Police Department about what had happened tonight. "Can I ask you something?" Tommy said hesitantly. "Go ahead. Are you really a Navy SEAL? I mean, you don't look like what I imagined." Sarah pulled out her military ID again and handed it to him. "What exactly did you imagine a SEAL would look like?" Tommy studied the ID carefully, comparing the photo to Sarah's face. "I don't know. Bigger, maybe? More obvious? Like the guys in the movies? The guys in the movies are actors, Sarah explained. Real special operations soldiers come in all shapes and sizes. What matters isn't how we look. It's how we think, how we train, and how we respond when people we care about are threatened. She took her ID back and looked at both young men seriously. The military taught me that the most important mission is protecting innocent people from those who would harm them. Tonight, that included both my colleagues and you too. Marcus was using you, putting you in danger for his profit. He didn't care if you got killed or spent the rest of your lives in prison. Rico was nodding slowly. We were really stupid, weren't we? You were desperate and made poor choices, Sarah corrected. Stupid is doing it again after learning better. She handed each of them a business card with her contact information. Call me tomorrow afternoon. I'll have information about the patient assistance program and the electrician job. But remember our deal. Any contact with Marcus or his people, and you're on your own. As Tommy and Rico walked away toward the stairwell, Sarah finally allowed herself to relax slightly. The immediate danger was over. But she knew this was far from finished. Marcus had backed down tonight because the circumstances hadn't favored him, but he would likely try again with a different approach. Sarah walked to her car, checking underneath it for tracking devices or explosive devices. Old habits from deployment zones died hard. As she drove out of the parking garage, she was already mentally composing the report she would need to file with the Phoenix Police Department. But more than that, she was thinking about the larger implications of what had happened. If Marcus was targeting healthcare workers across the city, how many of her colleagues might already be compromised? How many had been approached by criminals and been too frightened to report it? Sarah realized that her transition from military service to civilian life had just taken an unexpected turn. She had thought her days of hunting dangerous criminals were behind her. But if threats like Marcus were targeting the healthcare community she had chosen to join, then perhaps it was time to combine her old skills with her new mission. As she drove through the Phoenix night toward her apartment, Sarah was already planning her next move. She had protected herself and her immediate colleagues tonight. But the war for the safety of healthcare workers was just beginning. And this time, she wouldn't be fighting it alone. 3 hours later, as she finally sat in her living room with a cup of tea, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her sister Emma. Got your emergency message? Are you okay? Should I call the police? Sarah smiled as she typed back. I'm fine. Handled it myself. Looking forward to seeing you and the kids this weekend. Some battles never really ended, she reflected. They just moved to new territories. But that was fine with Sarah Martinez. She had signed up to protect people, first as a soldier and now as a nurse. If criminals wanted to threaten either of those communities, they would discover that some defenders never really retired from the fight.